Welcome to the academic year's first teaching seminar series, a monthly series where we're talking about innovations in teaching. Today we are going to be having the second on the inclusive teaching series, which will be happening basically every other month from now through the rest of the year. And this is going to be on increasing inclusion. This will be with Dr. Jennifer Passy and Dr. Kina Montenegro. So, all right, thank you.
Hey, thanks very much, Mike. And thank you to Mike and Wendy for reinvigorating the Teaching and Learning Seminar Series. We'll have a little bit more about what's coming up next month at the end of our session. So now, before I get to today's presentation, I'd like to take a minute to give a land acknowledgement. So I gratefully acknowledge that I was raised in Nova-Jiwanong, where the Russian waters meet, the treaty and territorial lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, in what is colonially known as Peterborough, Ontario. I wish to thank all First Peoples of Canada for their care for and teachings about this land and all our relations, and hope that we honor those teachings. We are honored to live and work on the ancestral lands of diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Nihewa, Niitsitapi, Métis, Nakota, Haudenosaunee, Dene, Anishinaabe, and Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enhance our vibrant community. Miskwichi-Waskagan, or Beaver Hills House, is governed by Treaty 6 and is part of the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. So you may notice that there is a QR code present on the first slide. There is the same QR code on the last slide, and I will be sending out a copy of these slides after the presentation is over. If you go to the QR code, you will see a video of today's presentation and a whole bunch of resources, including copies of community agreements and things like that that we're going to talk about in today's session. So today, this is really an opportunity for Kina and I to just talk to you about the different ways that we have tried to make our classes more inclusive for our students. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, there will be an opportunity at the end, but you can always reach out to us individually. Okay, so today we will be exploring strategies for increasing community in your classes. We will also be discussing methods for enhancing 2S LGBTQ+ inclusivity, and we will consider teaching the hidden curriculum to students. So one of the things that I've done to try to increase inclusion in my classes is to use a welcome survey. So a welcome survey is a great way to get to know things about your class before this term begins. So I usually send out the welcome survey about a couple of weeks before the term, and I might ask students various things about themselves, like why they like to be in class, what topics they're interested in. I've even surveyed my students on the different study skills they use. Now, another great thing about the welcome surveys is you can use them to have the class make choices. They actually have a voice in different aspects of your class. So for example, one of the things that I do is I might have a couple of days or a whole unit even in my class that's devoted to special topics, and I have the students vote on the welcome survey for which special topic they would like included. For my seminar class in the past, I've had students vote on readings. I've also had students vote on which day of the week they would prefer to have my evening office hour. Okay. Another thing that you can do is identify common concerns. So you can ask students about what their biggest concerns are about taking the class. And this can be a good way to dispel myths about your course. So for example, when I do the welcome survey for the Psych 212 research method class, I have lots of students responding that one of their biggest concerns is statistics because they feel like they're not very good at statistics. And then I get to tell them on the first day, not only do other students share this concern, but that they will not have to do any statistics for my class, except one thing that they use an online calculator for. Okay, so you can also take this opportunity to share resources. So for example, students might tell me for my research methods class that they don't know anything about APA and they're worried about that. And I can tell them, this was a concern that you raised, but we have these modules on APA that we're going to be doing every week. So you don't need to know anything about APA beforehand. Now, another way that you can use surveys is using them through the term to try to make your class more inclusive. You could do something like a midterm survey, but what I found useful is to have an inclusion survey available all throughout the term. This is an anonymous Google form that I have available to my class. I have it linked in my syllabus and on my Canvas page. Students can access this anonymous form at any time to make suggestions about how the class could be more accessible and inclusive. Sometimes students make suggestions that are already implemented, but they make them right at the beginning of the term. They want to make sure something like, having captions or recording or something like that is available, and I can use that opportunity to assure them that that's available or to show them where a resource is. Also, sometimes students have really good suggestions about how the class should be configured, what options there should be for assessment, things like that. Okay, now one other thing that both Kina and I have found really useful is to include an inclusion statement in the syllabus. So this is where you directly state a goal to promote a sense of belonging and inclusivity for the class. So you can use this to identify certain priorities that you have, and also to in a way that makes it a little bit more personal. So you can let students know that if they need help, they can reach out to you. If they need some kind of accommodation, that you're prepared to provide it. You can also use these statements to normalize help seeking by acknowledging that everybody needs some extra help at some point, or life can happen to people at various times in ways that they don't expect. So we have the inclusion statements, one from my class and one from Kina's class, available in the slides. But I'll just point out a couple of things about mine. So I use this as an opportunity to point out to my students how universal design for learning is implemented in my class. So I have a link to the different elements in the class that are inspired by that framework. I also have a link to our community agreement, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I urge the students to, make everyone feel included and to try to be inclusive themselves of all diverse opinions from their class members. I also take this opportunity to urge students to register their accommodations. But as an example of normalizing help seeking, I have this statement here about how we all need some accommodations at some point. So sometimes students will experience a death of a loved one or an emergency in their home community or something like that. And they may think that this is something that they shouldn't be discussing with me or that I'm not going to care about. But in telling them explicitly at the beginning of the term that they can come to me about those things might make them more likely to do so. I also have the link to the anonymous survey here, and I also include a campus map with locations for all gender washrooms and accessibility, transit, and other services on campus. Kina, did you want to say anything about yours?
Sure, yeah. So mine's a bit more brief. I have some of the same elements from Jen's inclusivity statement, but it's just in other parts of the syllabus or other things that we do, like the community agreements. It's mostly just letting the students know that these kinds of things matter to me, that they can come to me to talk about these kinds of things. It does specifically link to access services to make sure that they get those taken care of if they have accommodations. I also take it as an opportunity to share a little bit about any differently abled conditions I have, just to kind of normalize that and also let them know what they might expect could happen in the class if something is affected by this. I try to make it clear that they don't have to tell me why these kinds of accommodations in class would be helpful, but just what would be helpful. Just what can I do to help decrease any sort of barriers to learning. One thing I don't have is the Google form, the anonymous Google form, which I think is also a great addition to this. And that just, yeah, continues on there.
Okay, thanks, Tina.
Yeah.
So another thing that we both implement and do a little bit differently from each other is we have community agreements for our classes. So with students, you can create a community agreement or guidelines or contract to support open and brave discussions and work. So usually what I do with my students is I have a community agreement from a previous semester, or if you're starting with a new class, you could put in some statements that you think are important or feel you want them to remember. These could be about values you have for respecting diverse opinions, or they could be more specific to the type of class that you're dealing with. So for example, for my seminar class, I have lots of statements in our community agreement about how to have good scientific communication with each other, where we critique ideas without critiquing people, for example. We also want people to remember that if somebody else critiques their idea, they're not critiquing them as a person. I also have a statement in the one for my discussion class about being mindful of one's own talk time so that other people can contribute. So it just depends on what the particular values are for your class and what things you want to achieve. You can also use these community agreements to make your expectations clear, so you can make it clear that certain behavior is not going to be tolerated. You can also make your expectations clear about different aspects of your course, like assessments that have to do with how they interact with each other. So for example, in my seminar, participation in our weekly discussions is a component of their grade. So in our community agreement for that class, we agree as a group what constitutes good communication, the different ways they're allowed to communicate with each other. For example, through verbal contributions, through the chat, through our discussion forum, etc. Okay, so if you go to look at the copy of these slides in the Google Drive, you will see there's links to an example from one of my classes is example number 1, and then Kina has example number 2, and also Kina does something called a learning agreement. Did you want to mention that?
Really quickly, just the example 2 is the community agreements. It's a very similar kind of idea, just some guidelines for how we're going to be respectful with each other. What do we do if there is conflict? So we already have something in place in terms of how we're going to deal with that. And then the learning agreements is more logistical things. So agreements that we come together with in terms of like attendance, participation, how are we going to handle late work maybe. And then usually at some time in the first week or second week, I have the students work in groups. They read through these documents, see if there's anything they want added, see if there's anything that they want revised, anything missing, anything taken out. The example 2, it's, I think, almost a decade old at this point. I inherited it from other classes. It's gone through lots and lots of revisions with lots of instructors, lots of students, which is kind of nice to know that it's been around for so long. But feel free to take it and use it.
Another thing I'll mention with my community agreement, so I have it linked in the syllabus and on my homepage of Canvas. I encourage students to look at it before the first class, and then I do discuss it then. I usually give students until the second or the third class to go into the document and make comments or additions. One thing that happened one semester was a student made a suggestion about having a technology-free zone in the classroom because they had experienced other people's use of technology as very distracting. So we discussed it as a group, and what we agreed was that for the center aisle of our classroom, for the first 4 rows would be technology free. That left the other 2 sections at the front. People could use technology, so if people had some kind of assistive like speech to text thing on their computer or something like that, they still could do that, but people could sit in the center and not be viewing other people's screens. Okay, so that was something we did for that particular semester. I do remember there was a student in that class who raised their hand and said, you know, how are you going to police this? And I explained, I'm not. This is what we are agreeing as a community. And even though I bring snacks and stuff, I'm not their mom. I'm not there to make sure that they behave well. I'm counting on them and each other to hold themselves and each other accountable. So another thing that I have used to try to create inclusion that is especially useful for online courses is a getting to know you forum. So this is something I have available as soon as the students have access to Canvas, and it is a forum for students to introduce themselves to the class community. Now, you could keep this open-ended and ask them just to introduce themselves, but I find that students are more likely to do it if you give them some kind of specific task and model that in your own message on the forum to begin with. So what I ask my students to do is to talk about their name. So I tell them, for example, that if I Google my name, it means fair, and I don't know if that means fair as like pretty or fair as like pale, which would be accurate, the pale part. And then I also have students list 3 websites that are related to things they're interested in or describe their interests. So I explain they are not necessarily websites that they actually go to, but that point to their interests. And I encourage them to be specific, so not put like Netflix, Spotify, but put a specific playlist or a specific show or a specific book that you're reading or something like that. So now you can use this as an opportunity to introduce yourself, which can be important for any class, but especially for online classes that are asynchronous. It's important to create an instructor presence in the course. The students feel connected to you as a person. I also use this opportunity to give my pronouns to the class, and students are able to share their pronouns if they wish. I also tell them how to pronounce my name and encourage them to do the same in their messages, keeping in mind that we have a multicultural group of people. So even if you have, you know, a generic like Canadian name, that might not be as familiar to certain groups of students. I also find that when I'm reading through these messages and seeing about people's different interests or maybe even shared interests that I have, it helps me to see the students as individuals. So it helps to see them as real people rather than as a mass of faces in a classroom or a list of names online. Okay, another thing that you can do to make your class more inclusive and to just make things easier for everyone is to share a wayfinding video that Carlene made a couple of years ago. So the wayfinding video takes them from the remedy and thesis to the psychology elevator. You can make this available on your website and your syllabus, etc. Many of our students, even those in 3rd and 4th year, have never been to the psych department before and find navigating this building can be bit difficult. So at least getting them into the right wing is a start, and they can ask for more guidance from there. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it over to Kina.
So I want to go through 2 specific assignments that we do in class, or more like activities that we do. So first is the Fast Friends procedure, and then reflective essays. So Fast Friends procedure, it's a research-based method developed by, I believe his name was Arthur Anon, I think, and colleagues. And it's designed to create meaningful connections between individuals, but through structured conversations. So what happens is the students pair up together, usually randomly, and sometimes I'll do groups of three if it seems like it might be a quieter group. It might be easier to have a few more folks to talk with. It lasts about 45 minutes, so quite a while, but you get a lot done in just that 45 minutes. They answer these three sets of questions. So it's 36 questions divided into three sets. And they start off really light, surface level topics, but then they get deeper. Like maybe you've seen those like videos floating around online. It's like 36 questions to fall in love, like that kind of thing. That's kind of this idea, but to become friends so that they can get to know each other. So then they just take turns asking the questions and then answering the questions, and it helps create this sense of reciprocity. So here are just some examples of the questions. So like set one, given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you want as a dinner guest? And then they get to say who it is and why. But then it gets to like things like set three, tell your partner something that you like about them already. So trying to get a bit more of that interaction. There are questions about death. I usually try to let the students know that, and they're always able to skip a question if they don't want to answer that question for whatever reason that might be. Research has also shown, so some people have done studies on this kind of procedure. It also works really well in online spaces. So it doesn't just have to be in person. You can also pair people up online and get similar results. So great research-backed way to help people connect instead of having just surface level small talk with an icebreaker. It helps them get a little bit deeper. It helps them get to know someone in the class. Now they have someone that they know. They have someone that they know a bit more about rather than just a bunch of strangers. So it helps break down those barriers. And from the feedback, it seems like students like it. They say, I like this a lot more than just a regular icebreaker. I like getting to talk a bit more about the things I like and with some people. But one thing I have found, especially so teaching foundations, the international cohort of psych students, is that not everything translates well. Like there's one question, it's do you have a secret hunch about how you might die? So also the death, but then also they ask, what's a hunch? What does hunch mean? So just something to be aware of with that as well. Another assignment, and it is linked in the resources and linked here, the slides that have the questions on them. So this is another assignment, a reflective essay. So self-reflective assignment, and it's where students get to examine their own identities, things like race, gender, class, language, and they reflect on how this has shaped their different perspectives, their knowledge, their biases within the lens of any course. So the example I have linked was an assignment from an environmental psych and public health class that was looking at social justice. So the theme there is justice. How do your identities have they led you to how you think about justice and ways that you interact with justice and your experiences with justice? But again, you can use this for any sort of class. So like I'm using it right now for a diversity science course. There is also a new component that I've added to this. So essay is in quotes because it also doesn't have to be a written essay. I've expanded it to have more of an interdisciplinary approach to, again, speak to that inclusion. So they can write it, they can use some artwork, they can draw something, they can use a photograph. Some have written poetry. One wrote like a one-act play to kind of put something into their identity. Someone else, they just showed me today, they were asking if this is okay. They wrote a letter to their future selves, thinking about their identity. So that's the one thing that I've noticed that students struggle with this assignment is the open-endedness. I think the instructors know, like, or even as when you're a student, when you don't tell them, like, it has to be 1 to 2 pages, they're kind of like, well, then what do I do? And we try to, like, also talk about this idea of, what do you want to get out of this? Don't think about what I want. They always worry about trying to get it right, but we're trying to introduce these kinds of other assignments. So they do that at the beginning of the semester, and then at the end of the semester, they do a revision essay. They visit the essay again, they reflect on what they've learned in class, reflect on any experiences that they've had recently, and then they can update the essay however they would like. So here are some examples of guiding questions. So I do give them something to latch on to, some guiding questions to help them think about what they want to write about or draw or whatever it might be. And then the really fun part is that we do a gallery walk. So we put up their essays around the room and they know we're going to do this. And everyone can go around, read each other's essays, look at each other's work, and then we just can talk about that work. So it's an interactive way for us to do some more of that reflection It helps promote empathy, understanding, breaks down those barriers between the students again, and really highlights diverse viewpoints in the classroom. Like there are so many things they write about that I wouldn't know about just looking at them. And now I know about all these beautiful things that the students are bringing to the classroom. Okay, so those are those two assignments. Next part we're going to get into is Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus inclusivity. So just first considering that research has shown that using people's chosen names, using people pronouns can significantly improve mental health of individuals, especially youth, especially transgender youth. When we're thinking about populations that might experience depression when we don't do these kinds of things, this is what I'm thinking about with this part. Also considering how these kinds of things can be inaccessible to some people, inaccessible in terms of things just like the cost of changing names, thinking Edmonton, thinking about barriers in terms of needing permission slips for having to go by your chosen name in classroom and the effects that that can have on someone. So names and pronouns, super important for identity, super important for a sense of dignity. So just thinking about how in the classroom, we're uniquely positioned to understand how identity is going to affect someone, how it's going to affect their well-being and their learning. So how can we make sure that we're respecting that in the classroom? Most of us are probably familiar with she, her pronouns, he, him pronouns, they, them pronouns, singular personal pronouns, they, them usage. I also wanted to note, not something new. The usage of they, them pronouns as singular pronouns is something that's been around for quite a while. Even in, is it the last edition, 7th edition APA, we saw that they added information about using inclusive language and using they, them pronouns as well. So we're seeing more of that. So it's just important to understand as well that we can't reliably determine someone's pronouns based on their appearance. So that's why we also want to do these kinds of things. I have strategies next in the classroom. So again, we can't just look at someone and know what they're bringing to us. It's also worth noting that for some individuals, these kinds of pronouns can change. So we'll talk about like how to do maybe a check-in. Some people use multiple sets of pronouns. So maybe she, they, meaning they use both she, her, and they, them. And then there are also neopronouns. So neopronouns are going to be pronouns outside of that dominant he, she, they. So things like sie, them, sie, zir, and am. And I put a link there to a short YouTube reel that has someone pronouncing each of these, and also giving an example of their usage if you would like. But even these kinds of pronouns, these neopronouns, have been around. I went through like a little rabbit hole of trying to find out some more information since like the 1800s. We've been seeing these kinds of neopronouns being used. So also something that's not new. In the 1800s, we saw it. In the 60s and 70s, there was a resurgence with different feminist queer communities also pushing for more inclusive language. And then recently, we've been seeing it again online. Okay. So now some strategies that you can use for inclusivity here. So I kind of separated out by some first week practices and then some other things you can do. So I also use a pre-class survey to get to know the students a bit more, what they bring to the class, what they hope to get out of the class, what are some concerns maybe they have that might impact their performance. Are they on a sports team? Do they have multiple jobs? Do they have family commitments? And then there's also a section for names, pronunciation, and pronouns. So just getting started with asking students how we should be addressing them. When introducing ourselves, just making sure that we model inclusion by sharing our own pronouns. So just further signaling to the students that these kinds of things matter. Name cards for learning names and attendance. So on the first day of class or second day of class or whenever, I bring in a bunch of markers and crayons and colored pencils, and the students can make little name tags. Sometimes they put their pronouns on. They don't have to, but Mezabine put on her pronouns. Gareth put on his pronouns, and he also wrote football number 1 with legs. He's really into football. All of his answers on the Fast Friends had to do with football. Lucas put no pronouns, but put his hobbies, public transportation, gardening, and photography, which is really nice because then we got to talk about that rail car that's right downtown in Strathcona. And he got to go see it, and he was very excited, showing me the photos of his trip to go see the rail car. Yasmin, so she also put down her pronunciation. So she put her name and then pronounced as Yasmin. And then there's just a couple of different other ones. I like Ola's. Ola's is really pretty.
Okay.
But yeah, they have fun making these. And they also serve another purpose in that at the end of class, they hand them back to me. And that's how I count participation for the day. At the beginning of the next class, I hand it back to them, so I have to learn their names. And then sometimes it's fun, once I've already learned their names, I'll ask if someone wants to pass out the name cards, and then they can also kind of make sure they know each other's names. Okay, so name tags, Zoom. If you're on Zoom, making sure you have your pronouns shown, even taking time to show the students how to do that on their end. So that's what's linked there, just a Zoom resource on how to do that. And then just overall, things like inclusivity statements. So just signaling again to the students that these kinds of things matter. Providing space for regular check-ins. So maybe reminding students that they can update their welcome surveys. We work with markers a lot, so I always remind them, like, if you want, you can update your name cards. If you want to make a new one, you can make a new one. That's no problem. Other small things, like just having your pronouns in your email signature, help a lot. I think we've been seeing that more and more and more, which has been great, but just having even that there. I even recently added a flag there. So queer flag just as another kind of signal. And then also the big thing, mistakes happen. Mistakes happen. They're going to happen when we're talking to someone. Maybe if someone has a name change, maybe if someone has pronouns that we're not used to, we might misgender someone. It happens. It happens. It's going to happen. It doesn't feel good when it happens, but it happens. Best approach is just to briefly correct yourself, briefly apologize, and then move on. Try not to bring too much attention to it. Try not to make it a big deal. Don't try to draw out more attention to the error, potentially increase discomfort. One thing I think it was Mo Dimeke taught me is to yourself later or privately, whenever, just 3 times to yourself, say their name and their pronouns. Just trying to get that into your mind so that you, again, don't make that mistake. I want to emphasize the important impact, the positive impact of getting this right. When students know their identities are respected, their psychological safety increases. That frees up cognitive resources for learning. It increases their willingness to participate in class, and really fosters that sense of belonging, of inclusivity, that they belong here in this space. So how we visibly treat the students and each other is going to send a message to all of them in terms of that respect in our environment. And then here are just some resources. So first one is the Landing. So Landing is U Alberta's North Campus support, advocacy, peer listening services for 2S LGBTQ+ students. So they help promote safety, acceptance, and gender equity on campus. There's the EDI committee, so you can always reach out to us. Queer Coffee. Queer Coffee is every 3rd Thursday of the month, and that's more of a social hour to come and have some community. And then there's also, I added last minute, the UASU pronoun campaign. So this provides resources, classroom slides, and tips to create safer, more inclusive spaces for gender identities on campus.
So I just want to take a minute to discuss why it might be important to discuss the hidden curriculum with their students. Now, what is the hidden curriculum? The hidden curriculum refers to content or skills that are not explicitly taught, yet students are expected to know. So these can include a variety of different skills, but some of them, as examples, are how to study. I hear from colleagues all the time, oh, students don't know how to study. They never know what to do to study for my test. Well, have you taught them how to study? Many of our students come in with either no study strategies at all, or they have been taught to study in ways that the research shows are actually ineffective. This is not a character flaw in our students. It is something that we can address by providing them resources. Also, why go to office hours? Was a surprise to me to know that many students think of going to office hours as like going to the principal's office when you're in trouble in high school. So they don't know the different ways that they can make use of office hours. I know as an undergrad student, I went to office hours once in my last semester of my 4th year because TA did not grade a whole page of my exam, so I had to go to have that addressed. But it never occurred to me to go and see my professor. I didn't know why I might have to do that. Time management. So time management is a skill that people have to learn. You can give them some tools to better manage their time. And also how to send a professional email. This is another thing I hear colleagues grumble about, that they get inappropriate emails, or they get emails where the student is addressing them in a way that they don't want to be referred to. So you can easily get around that problem by telling them on the first day, you know, you can call me Jen or Dr. Passy, but not Dr. Jen, because I'm not Dr. Phil or those kinds of people. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that first generation students, so students who do not have parents or other family members who have gone to post-secondary education, are less likely to have this knowledge. So there is going to be an imbalance in your class, where some people are going to have this knowledge and other people are not. So you can level. Okay. Kira, is that what you're on? Maybe not. Okay. Oh, Tina, can you go back to the slideshow?
I'm trying to see if I mute you, that doesn't do anything.
Okay. You just click back on that. Hit. Okay. Now, one thing that you can do is make this knowledge explicit, give them some resources so they know what to expect. So, for example, I have this infographic that I made that explains the difference between my student hours and my virtual homework sessions. It tells them what the different reasons they might want to come to either of these sessions, the times, and this makes it really explicit to the students that I want them to come and see me, and they can come and talk about their concerns. They can talk about, you know, their future careers or wanting to be in a study group or whatever. Okay, Kina?
Yeah, so how do I study? This links to a document that I right now have in the syllabus and also on Canvas for the students. So it's just a little write-up in terms of acknowledging that not all of us know how to study, not all of us come to college, university with these kinds of skills, and then also really emphasizing that this is a skill. It's something that you can get better at, trying to make sure they have that growth mindset with this, that if they practice these kinds of things, it can get better, it can get, I don't know if easier is the right word, more efficient maybe, more efficient. It speaks to just the general idea of how much time to spend studying, how much time they should be focusing on their classes. It also adds in a little bit of information in terms of what is quality studying. So a lot of them, you know, they think studying is reading my notes. We talk about why that's not studying. And then it also gives a bunch of bullets with different strategies of things that they could try out as they're learning how to do this. So I give them one assignment that we used to do in class. Maybe some of you are probably familiar with it, the journal entries, was that what they were called? Where students, they pick a concept from the lecture, they define it in their own words, and then they give an example of it from their own life. So putting it in their own words, great, and coming up with lots of examples of that concept, really great. Other things, like how do you make practice questions? So maybe if they're going to be taking a multiple choice exam, how do I make my own practice questions? Which also can kind of help on the teaching end when students ask for more and more and more practice questions. I can say, well, you know what's even better if you can make your own practice questions, which they don't love. But I think we know like sometimes the things that we don't like doing are the things that are really good for us. So I give them resources in terms of the how to do that. How do you actually start with that? Other things like making their own examples, working with others, that classic, if you can explain it to someone else, that means you've got it. If you can do what I'm doing right here with you, then you can do it. We have a little note on ChatGPT. We talk a lot about it in class as a tool, making sure that we're not using it to replace critical thinking. We talk about the potential negative impacts of using it. We talk about environmental impacts. And then I just tell them if they're going to use it, just be careful with using it. Sometimes it really agrees with your incorrect logic. It's really easy to bully it into agreeing with you. So just make sure that you're using it in different ways and make sure you're aware and questioning how you're using it. But it's just a resource for them to try some new things, hopefully. And then it also really helps when you get that question of when the exam comes up, okay, well, how do I study? What am I doing? What do you want me to focus on? I can tell them, we already have the best tips. These are the best things that I would say to do for this class. And this is another activity that we sometimes do in class. So it's an academic skill lab, kind of like a workshop. If you click on the link, it goes to another Google Drive folder that has a lesson plan that I use for this, and then also 2 student worksheets. Right now it's split up into a Tuesday, Thursday class, but of course you can, take things out, add things, change the times up. But overall, it's just guiding students through evidence-based time management, study strategies, stress management techniques. So integrating psychological principles with practical exercises, focusing again on those things that they might not know how to do. So making sure they all have this information. So it just teaches them essential skills. It focuses on planning, self-regulation, coping strategy. In the class with the activity, we do some self-reflection. They get some peer feedback. They do some personalized learning. Part of it is even ending with making a little commitment card. Like, I commit to these kinds of things I'm learning about. I'm going to try to do these kinds of things that we're learning about. We talk about things like the Pomodoro technique. So, breaking work up into short timed intervals with breaks so that they can focus better. It can help with their productivity. We talk about note taking as well. So even just like how to take notes. Some of them aren't sure, they're writing down every single word. Maybe they're not writing down enough words. And then what do you do with those notes? We know writing the notes is great. But I think there was maybe one study or a couple study suggested that between the student who writes notes, doesn't write notes, not much of a difference in performance. It's about what they did with those notes. So not just writing it, but also how do we just write it? We go through SMART goals, so creating those specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound goals. Again, trying to increase motivation, success. On the other side of things, we talk about if-then plans. So if-then plans, just having them reflect on their life, how do their days usually go, and having a plan for what happens if. What happens if, the time that I usually spend studying, I have to do something else? What am I going to do instead to maybe make up that time? What's something smaller I could do to at least keep myself consistent? So giving them some strategies. We even talk about progressive muscle relaxation. So we'll do a little bit of meditation in class. So like last session, we talked about grounding exercises. So grounding exercises, giving students ways to help calm their nervous system, but also having times when they can use them, like telling them, okay, now is the time maybe when you want to think about those grounding exercises. So making sure going through some practice with that, helping them with cognitive reframing, challenging any sort of unhelpful thoughts they might have, replacing those with more balanced, more constructive perspectives. And we even do, again, that mindfulness, so doing a little bit of practice with meditation. One thing that we don't have in here, because I think we're going to maybe do it in a later session, is things like how to get involved in research, but also Wendy and Julia Self in the EDI committee. Right now they're working, I believe, on some stuff in terms of how to get some students some more information on that process, since we're hearing a lot of students trying to figure out how do I get into a lab. And I believe the honors instructors are also working on that.
Okay, so just one other thing I want to mention about some of the things that Kina just discussed. Sometimes you can work these techniques into your everyday week or your usual class plans. So for example, in my Psych 212 class, every Friday is our APA day. So they have a series of tasks to work on, but we structure it as a Pomodoro technique. We also have them make SMART goals at the beginning of the session, and we take a 3-minute break in the middle of the session where I play a movement break video from the University of Toronto. So today we did the stretching movement break, and most of the students who are in class actually did it sitting at their seats. So you can model some of these things right in your own class structure. There are lots of ready-made resources for how to study effectively. I highly recommend this website by the Learning Scientists. They have a whole bunch of resources that are freely available. There is a book that you can download, the PDF. It's a book for students called Ace That Test, and it goes over time management, Pomodoro technique, as well as effective study strategies like retrieval practice, interleaving, spaced practice, things like that. I will say for years, I have included a survey question about what study strategies students use in my welcome survey. And I can tell you that the ones that they are most likely to check off are the ones that are the least effective, like rereading their notes, rewriting their notes. These tend to be things that interfere with students' metacognition because every time they reread or rewrite something, the material feels more familiar. So they have this feeling of learning, even though if they really tried to pull that information from memory, they wouldn't be able to do so. Also from the Learning Scientists, basically any format that you would want to access this material in, they have available. They have a blog you can subscribe to that comes out with latest research on learning. They have a podcast that where there's episodes that go over various ways of using retrieval practice, other strategies. They have an overall video on 6 effective strategies. They have videos on each specific strategy, and they have downloaded posters that students can print for themselves to remind themselves of how to use these techniques. Okay. And that is the end for today. So we do have a whole folder, chock-a-block full of resources related to today's session. Sometime this afternoon, I will send out a link to the Google folder that will have a copy of these slides as well as a copy of today's recording in case there's anything you want to revisit. So now we have some time for questions. Yeah.
So like I have classes that are like minimum 150 students. And so how would you suggest scaling these things? Like they're nice ideas, but I don't know how to do some of them given the size.
So most of the ones that I've talked about, I've used in classes of 400 people. And so like the welcome survey, the getting to know you forum, the inclusion statement, all of that you can use even with large classes. Doing something like the getting to know you forum does take longer the more students you have, but you maybe have different expectations about learning the students' names and things like that for a 400-person class than you do for something like a seminar class where you're going to be calling on students to talk every time. So there's lots of things that we discussed that you could use with any number of students. Some things like the reflective essays or things like that could be things that you assign or you have them do in class, but that you don't have them hand in, but that you sort of walk around or have them discuss with each other. So there are ways to sort of tailor some of these things for larger classes. It just depends on if you're going to grade them or not. I think most of the things we're talking about are things that are ungraded.
The reflective essays, I usually do them complete incomplete. So it's a nice small percentage that they can get for their class for just doing something more on their own.
Deanna?
Thank you all. Looking forward to the older resources. Yeah, thank you for putting that together. A question, what do you do, or what would your suggestion be if you have a student who doesn't really want to participate? So, for example, when they get to know you 36 questions type of thing, what's your suggestion there? And you may notice it a different way, that they just aren't forming a group, or they come to you and say they don't want to, so that can be different too.
So I'll just tackle part of this and then I'll let Kina talk about the actual like fast friends procedure. But in certain classes that I have, participation is mandatory, but I try to make that participation as open and flexible as possible. So for example, in my seminar, participation is weighted to be about 20% of their grade. But they can participate verbally in the chat, they can participate on the discussion forum. There's various ways that they can choose to participate, but they still have to do it as part of the class. That's because the participation is tied to the learning outcomes we have about communication for that particular course. In terms of the Fast Friends procedure, I'll let Kina handle that one.
Yeah. So similar kind of idea in terms of some multiple means of engagement. It luckily hasn't come up yet where there hasn't been anyone who didn't want to participate in that specifically. I have had something similar though where culturally there was a student who culturally wasn't comfortable sharing personal details about their life. And what we ended up doing was just they worked with me on those kinds of things. I was like, well, do you feel comfortable talking with me? I can be your partner for this. And that seemed to work. I was hoping maybe like they might change their mind a little bit later, but it never really happened, and that's okay. So that kind of worked there, but that was also a really small class. So if there were more students, I don't know how feasible it would have been to do all of that one-on-one with them. They can always, say pass. So for that kind of activity, they don't have to participate. It's more just a way to get to know each other. Their grade isn't dependent on it or anything. So also emphasizing that. But multiple forms of engagement can be helpful. Depending on the student, it feels like it could be case by case, maybe like looking if it's like a pattern, if it's happening in class during seminar, I'm not really hearing from them at all, using any of the options that they have, maybe just approaching them and saying, is it okay if we talk about this? I just want to figure out why you're not participating. I want to make sure you're getting the full benefit of this course and getting all the things that we're trying to. But yeah, I don't have a better answer than that for the fair fast friends.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you both. So prior to the activity, do you make an announcement that if someone doesn't feel comfortable, or do you have it posted somewhere about what their options are, what they could do, or is it something that kind of you notice during and then it happens after?
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
So yeah, usually I let them know that we're going to be coming to this. So it'll be maybe day 2 or maybe into week 2, because usually I have Canvas or eClass set up now by week. So they see upcoming weeks, which is really nice to see and prepare themselves for what might be coming up. Yeah.
Another thing I'll mention is maybe why I don't encounter this problem as often is that I tend to run my classes high flex. So students can come in person, they can come online, or they can do the activities independently. And I make it really clear on the first day of class that I focus on active and experiential learning and what that means. And so the students who don't want to get together with other people, they kind of opt themselves out by how they engage with the class.
Great.
Which is not awesome, but we're meeting them where they are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good question.
Anybody else? We do have a couple of reminders. So Kina, do you want to talk about the film series?
Yeah. So recently the EDI committee has put out another kind of series, and this one is called Real Change, an EDI film series. So real, REEL, like a film reel, and then real, like REAL, real change. And so every third Monday of the month, we're going to be screening films that have some sort of EDI psychology focus. Third Monday of every month, I believe, is that the 22nd this month? I should know, but there are so many dates in my head. Okay, yeah, the 22nd will be the first one. It'll always be in room M145. So that's the rooms that are underneath Remedy outside of the big CSIS lecture halls. And this week, or rather that week, we're going to be watching Crip Camp. So Crip Camp, a documentary focused on the disability rights movement.
And one thing that Kina and I have each found helpful is to use films like this in our classes for either discussing specific types of content or getting students to think about things in a different way. So I encourage everybody to attend if they can, and the details for that session should be in your email, but there's also posters up around the department. Hey, Mike.
Right, so our next section of the teaching seminar series is going to be on October 10th in this room, same time. And it will be with Dr. Leah Daniels, who'll be talking about well-being and teaching. So a very good topic to, try to attend to. So I welcome you. We'll have coffee, tea, some snacks, and good company. So thank you for coming and have a great day.
Yeah, because he's got my clothes.